Max Verstappen just got into a Mercedes at the Nürburgring, and what he did next should not happen in professional motorsport. He didn't just win. He didn't just control the race. He finished over a minute ahead, on a track where one mistake ends everything. Against specialists. Against drivers who have spent years mastering this circuit. And he made them look average. No errors. No hesitation. No drop in pace. This wasn't a fight. It was a takeover. And here's the part that's making people inside Formula 1 very uncomfortable. He wasn't even at the limit. So if this is Verstappen, outside of Formula 1, what happens when he brings this level back to the grid? Stay with me, because this performance is already changing how teams, drivers, and even the FIA see the future. Subscribe now, because the truth behind this dominance only gets more serious from here. It started in a place where Formula 1 drivers are not supposed to feel comfortable. The Nurburgring Nordschleife. A circuit that doesn't care about titles, doesn't respect reputation, and doesn't forgive mistakes. This is where specialists thrive. Drivers who have spent years learning every corner, every bump, every blind entry at high speed. And even they struggle to get it right. So when Verstappen arrived, the expectation was simple. Adapt slowly. Learn the track. Build confidence. Maybe fight for a decent result. But from the very first session, something felt off. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just different. Because while others were searching for grip, searching for reference points, Verstappen looked like he already had them. And that's what led to qualifying. The moment where everything started to shift. Because he didn't just take pole position. He took it by nearly 2 seconds. On this track, that gap doesn't make sense. The Nordschleife compresses performance. It hides differences between cars. It punishes anyone who tries to overreach. So when someone creates that kind of margin here, it forces a different question. Not how fast is the car, but how far ahead is the driver. And here's where it gets even more serious. Because this wasn't just one perfect lap. It wasn't a lucky run. The long pace told the same story. Consistent. Controlled. Relentless. No drop-off. No instability. And that combination is extremely rare. But most people missed the deeper layer. Because while the gap was impressive, the way it was built was far more important. Every input looked measured. Every correction, almost invisible. Every risk, calculated before it even appeared. This wasn't a driver adapting to a new category. This was a driver removing uncertainty from one of the most unpredictable tracks in the world. And that's where this stops being impressive, and starts becoming uncomfortable. Because if Verstappen can reach this level of control here, on a circuit designed to create chaos, then what happens when he returns to an environment he already dominates? But we're not there yet. Because qualifying was only the warning. What happened at the start of the race is where everything could have fallen apart. The lights go out, and instantly, the entire story changes. Because everything that happened in qualifying means nothing now. Cold tires, heavy fuel, cars packed together, and a track that punishes even the smallest mistake. This is where control disappears. And for a moment, Verstappen loses the lead. And Audi gets through. Aggressive. Precise. Driven by someone who knows this circuit inside out. And just like that, the perfect narrative begins to crack. Because now, this isn't about dominance anymore. This is about pressure. Real pressure. The kind that forces decisions faster than you can think. And for a few laps, it looks like we're about to see the limit. Because the Audi doesn't back off. It pushes harder. Late on the brakes. Tight on the exits. Using every inch of the track. And Verstappen doesn't respond immediately. He doesn't panic. He doesn't force the move. He waits. And that's where something changes. Because while everyone is watching the battle, they miss the shift. Verstappen starts learning, adapting, reading every movement ahead of him, corner by corner, line by line, until the pressure starts to move, not onto him, onto the driver in front. And that's the moment everything turns. Because just before the first pit window, he makes the move. Clean, controlled, no risk. And just like that, the lead is back. But here's what most people didn't notice. He didn't just take the position. He took control of the race again. And from that moment, something unusual starts to happen. Because instead of managing the pace, instead of protecting the lead, he goes faster. And that decision doesn't make sense on the surface. Because this track doesn't reward aggression. It punishes it. Traffic is coming. Slower cars. Multiple classes. Unpredictable situations. This is where races are usually lost. Not won. And yet, Verstappen leans into it. Pushes deeper. Closer to the limit. And suddenly, the race begins to split into two realities. what everyone sees, and what's actually happening underneath. Because on the outside, it looks like he's just leading. But in reality, he's building something much bigger. A gap. Yes. But more importantly, total control over everything that's about to come. And that's when the race introduces something that no driver can fully control. And this is where everything becomes unpredictable. Because endurance racing doesn't reward the fastest driver alone. It rewards timing, strategy, and sometimes pure chaos. That chaos arrived through one detail that changed the entire race. A BMW. Different approach. Different pit window. A shorter stop, built into the regulations, giving them track position they hadn't earned on pace. And just like that, Verstappen is no longer leading. Not because he made a mistake. Not because he lost speed. But because the race itself shifted underneath him. And this is where most drivers lose control. Because strategy battles are messy. They don't follow logic. They depend on traffic. On timing. On moments you cannot predict. And suddenly, the track fills up. Slower cars. Multiple categories. Drivers fighting completely different races, unaware of what's coming behind them. This is the Nurburgring at its worst. And right in the middle of it, two completely different mindsets collide. The BMW, pushing aggressively, trying to maximize its advantage. The Mercedes, calm, precise, waiting for the right moment. And Verstappen sits in between. Watching. Closing the gap. Not forcing anything. And this is where the pressure quietly shifts. Because leading is one thing. Being chased, here, is something else entirely. You see everything. You feel everything. You know that one mistake ends it. And eventually, that mistake comes. A misjudgment in traffic. A split-second decision. Contact with a slower car. And just like that, a penalty. The entire race changes in an instant. Not gradually. Completely. Because in endurance racing, one error doesn't cost you time. It removes you from the fight. And now, the path is clear again. Verstappen is back in control. But this is where the story takes a turn no one expected. Because with the pressure gone, with the threats eliminated, most drivers would slow down, manage the gap, protect the car, finish the race. But Verstappen doesn't. He does the opposite. He pushes harder. And that decision reveals something far more important than the result itself. Because now, there is no reason to take risks. No one to fight. Nothing to prove. And yet, the pace increases. The gap grows. The control tightens. And suddenly, this is no longer a race. It's a demonstration. Not of speed alone, but of something much more unsettling. Because what Verstappen is showing here is not just that he can win. It's that he can decide how the race unfolds. And that kind of control changes everything. Because what comes next is the part that made Formula One start paying very close attention. And this is where the race stopped being about competition and started revealing something much bigger. Because with everything under control, with no real threats left, the logical decision is simple. Protect the result. Bring the car home. Avoid unnecessary risks. That's what every experienced team expects. That's what every driver is trained to do. But Verstappen made a different choice. He got back in the car for the final stint. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. And that single decision changes the entire meaning of this victory. Because now, this is no longer about winning. That part was already secured. This becomes something else. Preparation. Simulation. Execution under controlled pressure. He wasn't just finishing the race. He was rehearsing something bigger. Pit entries. Pit exits. Managing traffic at the end of a race. Maintaining focus when fatigue starts to appear. And here's where it becomes uncomfortable. Because while everyone else was trying to survive the final phase, he was perfecting it. Lap after lap. No drop in concentration. No visible mistakes. No hesitation. Just precision. And then, the gap starts growing again. Not holding steady. Not stabilizing. Increasing. Over a minute by the end. In this kind of race, that doesn't happen by accident. That doesn't come from luck. That is built. Carefully. Deliberately. And what makes it even more unsettling is that there was no reason to do it. No pressure. No rival close enough to threaten. Nothing forcing him to push. And yet, he did. Which leads to a much deeper question. Because when a driver keeps pushing, even when the result is already secured, it means one thing. He's not racing others anymore. He's chasing something else. A standard. A level. A version of performance that isn't defined by competition, but by control. And that's where this stops being just an impressive victory. Because now, it's no longer about how fast Verstappen is. It's about how complete he has become. Every phase, every situation, every variable, handled, optimized, repeated. And inside Formula One, that's where the concern begins. Because dominance is one thing. We've seen that before. But this is something different. Because when a driver doesn't need pressure to perform, when he creates his own, then the limits of the sport itself start to feel very real. And that leads directly to what everyone in the paddock is now quietly asking. Not how he won this race, but what happens next when this version of Verstappen returns to Formula One. And this is where the impact truly begins to spread. Not on track, not in lap times, but inside the minds of the people who have to race against him. Because performances like this don't just end when the checkered flag drops. They stay. They get analyzed, replayed, questioned. Drivers saw it. Not just the result, but the way it was executed. No chaos. No visible struggle. No moments where things almost went wrong. On a circuit designed to create mistakes, he removed them completely. And that creates something dangerous. Doubt. Because every driver operates within a reference. A belief of what is possible. What is controllable. What is repeatable. But when someone steps outside that framework and makes the extreme look routine, it forces a question that's very hard to ignore. Is that level reachable or not? And if it's not, then what are you really competing against? Teams felt it too. Because this wasn't just about driving skill. This was adaptability at the highest level. A Formula One driver stepping into a completely different car, a completely different racing format, a completely different environment, and removing the learning curve entirely. That's not supposed to happen. There are supposed to be limits, adjustment periods, mistakes. But here, none of that appeared. And that leads to something even more uncomfortable. Because Formula One is built on precision, on specialization, on mastering one ecosystem better than anyone else. But Verstappen just showed that his advantage may not be limited to that ecosystem. And if that's true, then the gap is no longer just technical. It's human. And that's much harder to close. Even the FIA is paying attention. Not because any rules were broken, but because of what this represents. Control across disciplines. Consistency in completely different conditions. A level of performance that doesn't depend on context. And that introduces a new variable into the sport. One that cannot be regulated easily. Because you can adjust cars, you can change rules, you can rebalance performance, but you cannot limit a driver's adaptability. And that's where everything connects. Because this wasn't just a one-off victory. This was preparation. Every lap, every decision, every calculated risk, building toward something bigger. The 24 hours of Nurburgring. A race where speed alone is meaningless. Where endurance, focus, precision, and mental resilience decide everything. And now, Verstappen arrives there differently. Not as a guest, not as an experiment, but as a reference. As a driver who has already proven that he can control this environment, that he can dominate it, that he can remove its unpredictability. And that changes everything. Because now, every team has to adjust. Every driver has to rethink their limits. And the sport itself has to confront a new reality. Because if this level continues, if this version of Verstappen carries into every category he enters, then Formula One isn't just facing dominance. It's facing something far more difficult to define. Something without clear limits. And that leads to the final thought. Not about this race. Not about this victory. But about what comes next. Because if this was just preparation, then what exactly is he preparing to become?